Welcome to week 14 of my Unhitched webinar short series. These are a series of short, easily digestible webinars where I'll be covering some of the most common questions and issues I come across in my practice. And so this week we're going to be moving on to part 3 of Getting Divorced Gracefully. This one turned into a 3-parter unintentionally because I had more material than I realized. So today we're going to be covering part 3 of that, which also includes healing after divorce. So you are in the right place if you are considering divorce, if you're heading toward divorce, if you're already in the throes of it, and also if you are post-divorce. Some of the things we'll talk about today can help in healing that relationship after the divorce has happened. And so I've shared this before in prior webinars, but one of the reasons I'm really passionate about this is because in my own experience, going from a pretty high conflict marriage to a fellow attorney to a really graceful divorce and a post-divorce friendship that was really beautiful before my ex-husband passed away about a year ago. And with our relationship, I always say that if it could happen for us, it could happen for anyone. That healing is really possible. And so I'm very passionate about graceful divorces and in that space of healing after a divorce. So just a little bit more about me. Of course, my name is Sunny Joy McMillan. I'm a recovering attorney. I'm a practicing coach. I have a book called Unhitched, Unlock Your Courage and Clarity to Unstick Your Bad Marriage. I'm the host of the Sunny in Seattle radio show. My work has been featured in Oprah Magazine and Best Self Magazine, Hay House Radio, and some other places. I work pretty closely with the collaborative law community up in King County. And so, as I mentioned earlier, one of the most important credentials in my bio is the fact that I've been through this. And I'm actually pretty proud of how my ex-husband and I conducted ourselves, both during the divorce as well as after. And so I hope and wish that for other people. I know that it's possible if you show up and do the work. So that's what we're going to talk about here today. So we're going to spend about 20 minutes here. I'm going to be sharing more tips and suggestions, just building on what we've been doing for the last couple weeks on getting divorced gracefully, and then as well talking about how to heal that relationship after a divorce. I won't be taking any questions because I want to keep these nice and short. But if you do want to know more, you do have questions about your specific situation, I will share how to take this further at the end of the webinar. And of course, you can continue showing up, although next week will be our last week. We'll round this out for an even 15 webinars in this series that I've been doing. So you've got one more to go if you want to keep showing up. So just to recap, for the last couple weeks when we were talking about graceful divorce, some of the things we covered were getting active in the process, meaning not just getting carried along by the current of the legal process, and why it's important to get active and how to do that even in the face of an exhausting process, or what can be a pretty exhausting process. We also talked about the ability of you to write your own rules in divorce. Yes, there are legal structures that you will need to abide by, but outside of that, you can get creative and you can do things your way. Avoiding nuclear warfare in divorce, how to do that, some suggestions on how to do that, and suggestions as well on what to do if you are avoiding nuclear warfare, but your spouse is going nuclear. So that's what we've covered so far. So today we're going to be talking about divorce ceremonies and healing after divorce. So I will just go ahead and start. Let's dive in about divorce ceremonies. So I'll just share my own story around this. So I've been sharing bits and pieces about the divorce process that my husband, then ex-husband, my now ex-husband, then husband went through when we went through this process. And so I wanted to share exactly how it went down on the day that we finally got our decree signed and everything was completed and finalized. And I mentioned, we got separated in 2011. We started proceedings in 2012. We did our property settlement in 2013, but we didn't actually sign our decree until around 2015. And that was very deliberate. We really wanted that time to heal the relationship before we signed that decree. Now, that doesn't work for everyone, but it did in our circumstance. And I'm very glad that we handled it that way. But one of the other things that went into that process was that final day in 2015 when things were signed and done in the eyes of the law, and we stood before a judge and got everything completed. So we very deliberately left our attorneys at home that day. We went just the two of us to the courthouse, and states have different laws around how you will do these things, but there are a lot of similarities. And so generally you will have to have that decree signed, and you will have to do some proof up questions before a judge. And so we decided to do that, just the two of us. I bought a dress for it. He wore a sport coat, and we got to the courthouse, and we held hands as we were waiting for our name to be called. We went up in front of the judge together, just the two of us, and the court reporter ended up crying. We were crying. We were either holding hands or I had my arm in his for the duration of it. And I'm really proud of how we did that. It wasn't easy. There were some awkward moments. There were some painful moments, sad moments, but we really showed up for one another. And after that was done, we then had the court reporter, or I'm sorry, a notary public who was doing some of our documentation, she took our picture in the courthouse. And then we went to the Four Seasons, we got married at the Four Seasons in Austin many moons ago. We went back to the place where we had our wedding, and we had lunch overlooking the lawn where we got married. And it was just a really beautiful container to bring closure to the end of not only the divorce process, but really the marriage, and what started with an opening the container with our wedding all those years ago, and then bringing it to a close together. And so I share that because divorce is often approached as, how can I get this over with as quickly as possible and sweep it under the rug without anyone having to know about it, or as few people as possible knowing about it, as fast as possible, and maybe even trying to avoid it yourself so you don't even have to deal with it. And ritual and ceremony are important for humans. Ritual and ceremony provide touchstones in our lives to open containers for new things and close containers for past things. I mean, think about how much time and energy went into your wedding. For most people, even if you just went to the Justice of the Peace, you probably wore a dress. It was for women who identify as women. You probably picked out something that was special. I picked out a wedding dress, and I had a pretty big wedding. You may have, as a couple, decided who you wanted to be there with you to celebrate that day. You may have had special food that was important to you and a reception that followed, or all of the things that go into a wedding ceremony and all its various iterations throughout cultures and time. So we think about how much time went into that, and then you think about how we treat divorce. And yeah, it's not always as happy of a time, but it can be as meaningful of a time. Now, you may not have a spouse or a partner who is willing to show up and do this with you. And that's okay. For there to be ritual and ceremony around divorce, it can be just you. And this is really the questions that I usually ask clients in helping prepare these types of ceremonies or rituals around divorce are, what do you need to feel whole and complete around the process? And again, you may be answering these questions by yourself, or you may be answering them as a couple if you decide to do this together, kind of like my ex-husband and I did when we were going through it. Another question to ask is, how can you best honor the parts of the past that you did well, release the parts of the past that you are done with, that maybe you wish you'd done better or differently or were pretty painful? How can you release those? And then how can you do this ceremony or ritual such that you embrace the new chapter that's coming, open the container for the new next chapter? And then finally, like your wedding ceremony, how can you bring in your values or the things that are most important to you into this divorce ceremony? And people are really rewriting the rules on divorce. You see a lot of people coming out of the courthouse now posting pictures on social media together with their decree. And yeah, it may not be always happy, but there can be meaning and joy in it. There can be a completion that really helps set you up in a whole way for when you enter the next phase of your life. And I wanted to share with you, I've never done this before on Zoom, so we're just going to see how this goes. I want to screen share, and if it will allow me to play this video. So we're just going to try this. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and I will just tell you the gist of it. A client shared this with me, and so I am pulling this up on Facebook. Okay, so I'm hoping that this is sharing, and we'll see. Let me see what happens when we go ahead and play this. Let's see. Okay. Now it is not playing the sound, so you may just be able to see the video. There are subtitles here. So basically what we're seeing here is a divorce ceremony, and the couple is, there's an artist, Grayson Perry, who filmed this, and he created a piece of art, this beautiful silk screen or silk piece that they are holding. And they're going through this divorce ceremony where they basically stood in front of many of the same family and friends that came together for their wedding. There are two people holding that silk piece that was created for the ceremony. Those are their daughters. So of course they brought their kids into the ceremony. But basically they are coming together with family and friends in a meaningful way to be supported as they go through this journey of divorce. So what I'm going to do when I send out the recording for this, I will put the link for this so that you can check out this video on Facebook and see for yourself, because it's about 5 minutes. But if you've been watching here with me along through the webinar, you can see it's a beautiful ceremony where they actually did something similar to vows. They had something that they shared with each other and spoke words that, provided some closure to what was happening. And then they'll go through, I'm gonna go ahead and pause the video and stop the screen share here. But basically what they ended up doing was they took this beautiful silk piece of artwork, and the artist had them during the ceremony cut it up the middle. So it's split into two pieces, symbolizing the divorce. And then had them, the friends and the family and the children who were there, safety pin it back together. And that was the finished piece after all of it, after they'd spoken their words. And that's another way of doing things. My ex-husband and I had even talked about having a divorce reception where we would invite many of the same people if they wanted to come help us celebrate each of us going into the next part of our lives, because having some of those same people around you, chances are they're still around you during your divorce, but how are you bringing them together and creating community around this event in a way that can not only support you, but help other people move through it? I mean, if you're watching that video, you see there were people in the audience who were crying, and that's to be expected. It doesn't mean that divorce is a mistake. It doesn't mean that anything is wrong. It means that we're human, and that moving through uncomfortable or sometimes even comfortable, I think grief is a magical emotion, but moving through those spaces, it's part of being human. And when you embrace them, it just sets you up for your future in a much more whole way than you would otherwise. So I'll leave you with this quote. I was thinking if we had sound, you would be able to see it, but the artist who created that silk piece said at the very end of the video that this is not a trivial party. This is a celebration of emotional maturity and love. Even though it's the end of a relationship, it's about love. And that's a great thing. And I couldn't agree more. So I will be sharing that video as it comes up, for clients, for ideas for how to do this in a way that can make a divorce perhaps as meaningful as the wedding was, because it's catalyzing a whole new type of growth, healing, and transformation that's only possible when you go through a divorce. So let's talk about what happens post-divorce. I mentioned that I had a really great relationship with my ex-husband, and this is one of the reasons I'm passionate about this space particularly, graceful divorce and post-divorce. Because when I went through my divorce, I carried a lot of anger at my then husband, soon to be ex-husband. And I know he had a lot of anger and resentment toward me as well. I mean, we'd been carrying it for a long time. We'd been carrying it since we returned home from the honeymoon, quite frankly. And for whatever reason, no amount of therapy had ever been able to really get us to hear each other, to see each other, and to feel that seen and heardness that can be very important, and to really make true apologies for the part that we played in co-creating the marriage that was pretty dysfunctional. So we went about it after the divorce. So two elements of this. Both of these were inspired by Byron Katie and her book, Loving What Is. Many webinars ago, we talked about mind management and thought work, that it's really our thoughts about things, not the actual things that happen to us. That's what causes the problem. And anytime you have a thought or a belief that is causing you suffering, usually that's a trigger or what's the word? It's a sign that you're believing something that isn't true. Your suffering around your thoughts is a signal to look at the thoughts and find what actually is true. So in looking at Byron Katie's work, one of the things that she talks about in her book, Loving What Is making amends. She actually calls them living amends, meaning that you're actually taking what you're learning in your thought work out into your life and living it. And so I'll just give you an example of what this looks like. So there were two elements in this making amends process that were really important. These were the two most pivotal things that transformed my relationship with my ex-husband: reporting, and then the making amends through apologizing, making things right. So what happened was, when I started looking at my thoughts, and the example that I'll just use here is that my husband should have cared more. He should have cared more. And I could use that one till the cows came home to create all kinds of anger and resentment toward him, because he worked a lot. As a result of working really hard, workaholism, he was pretty depressed. His depression expressed as anger usually. And so I had all of these reasons why he should care more. You know, he should be nicer. He should be more present. He's never around. He just thinks he can pay for everything. And then I'm going to just show up and be this wonderful wife. And I had all of these stories that, he should have cared more was the umbrella under which all those fell. When I started looking at that thought, and one of the elements of the thought work that we talked about is turning it around, finding a better feeling thought, finding one that is even truer than the original thought. When I turned that statement around, it became one of the ways you can look at it is, I, Sunny, should have cared more. Could I find where that was true? And oh my goodness, yes, I could. I wasn't really present in the relationship emotionally, the emotional intimacy that he wanted, to feel a true partnership, to feel that someone had his back. I was really not there for that. And I knew that. Whether or not I would have admitted it, whether or not I could even articulate it at a certain time pretty early on in the marriage, I just wasn't present in the marriage in that way. And there's so many ways I could have cared more. And once I started realizing that, and realizing, oh my gosh, me not caring was triggering some of him not caring. And it was just this vicious feedback cycle where we just created a monster basically in the marriage, in that area of not caring, and so many other areas. So number one in making amends was reporting. As I was discovering these things, the part that I had played, I felt compelled to report back to him on what I had discovered, that I could have cared more. Now, when reporting, you don't give any energy to the things that your spouse could have done, should have done, did do that you hated. This is not about them. This is only about you and the part you played. I don't care if they provoked it. I don't care if really they were an equal player in this particular incident. Don't care. This is about you and you alone. So can you report on your part without saying, well, you started this, but I do feel bad about this? Can you just say, look, I did this and I'm really sorry. I did this. I should have done this and I'm really sorry that I didn't. So just report on your role in the conflict. So what I ended up doing was writing this long letter to my ex-husband, and it reported on my role in the conflict, number one, so reporting. And number two, it made amends by making things right. I think Byron Katie defines amends as to right the perceived wrong. So I did this by apologizing, like actually saying, okay, here's what I discovered in looking at my thoughts, my beliefs, and my actions, and all of the things, behavior and patterns in the marriage. Here's what I discovered, and here's what I'm really sorry for. Here's what I wish I had done differently. Here's where I could have shown up differently or better. And then I even kind of added a little bit of thanking him for all the things that he did well. Because even though there were a lot of things that perhaps he didn't do well, and there were a lot of things I didn't do well either, but even though I could point to things he didn't do well, that's not the point of making amends. all I did was thank him for the things that he did right, for, really being a ridiculous provider for our family, for being really having my back in a lot of instances where I don't know that I could have done the same for him. So there were a lot of ways that he showed up really beautifully in the marriage, and I appreciated it so deeply. So that's what I told him. And it was, 5-6 pages, single spaced. And I sent it to him without any expectation that he would read it, acknowledge it, or anything would come of it. And I feel really blessed that I had an ex-spouse who wanted to show up and do amends with me, do forgiveness with me. And that letter where I reported on my role and then tried to make it right by apologizing and then also thanking him for what he did well, that paved the way for communication. And it wasn't easy and immediate. It was 3 to 4 years before I was ever even able to write that letter. It was a lot of personal work on my part to even have these realizations of what I had done in the first place. And then so 3-4 years later, I write the letter and he actually responds, and it becomes this back and forth letter writing. Then it became meeting in person where we talked about it. And before you know it, we had 3 or 4 years post-divorce where I visited him on every holiday that I was around back in Texas, that I would visit him actually anytime I was in Texas, that we would try to get together. We would talk about, celebrate the things we'd done well. We were still apologizing for things until he passed in 2018. So I can't imagine where the relationship would have gone. And this was also part of the visualization I talked about last week. I had a vision that someday that we would get together, him with whoever he ended up with, his next partner or wife, me with my partner, Chase, who I've been with for about 7 years now, and that we would be able to come together and be with one another in a really beautiful way. We didn't get to that point because he passed away, but what I can tell you is I am so glad that I made amends with him, because I didn't know he was going to be leaving this planet way earlier than anticipated. But we got to a really beautiful place. And I wish that for other people. Now, caveat that I've said in a lot of these, if you're married to a narcissist, a sociopath, psychopath, anyone in that cluster B personality disorder category, or some of the other personality issues that the folks can have, this may not be an option for you. It may not even be advisable or preferable, because you're just dealing with it's a totally different animal. So I have different tips and suggestions for that. So just let that be the caveat. But if you have someone who's willing to show up with you, awesome. If you don't, you can still do this work. Writing this letter, even if he hadn't ever responded, I cannot tell you what it did for me personally. It's that whole cleaning your side of the street thing. Even if you were doing this by yourself, the ceremony by yourself, the making amends by yourself, that's okay. It still is cleaning your side of the street so that you enter your next phase, you enter your next relationship in a much different place. So the pitfalls that I see around this usually are not giving your divorce it's fair due. You gave your wedding, most likely people gave their wedding some amount of preparation, meaning, and planning. Give your divorce the same thing. Allow yourself to close the container on the marriage so that you can move on whole. And then secondly, really clinging to your rightness post-divorce. Byron Katie, one of the things that she says is that, do you want to be right or do you want to be free? And ultimately freedom was more important to me. I'll just share one last quote from Byron Katie around this that I find particularly meaningful when it comes to making amends. And, let this be your guidance. Apologize and make amends for your own sake. It's all about your own peace. What good is it to be a talking saint? We've got an earth full of them. Be a living saint. Be an acting saint. Actually show up and do the action, do the hard work that it takes perhaps to heal some of the wounds that divorce can catalyze. But just like a wound can be created, it can be healed. And think about breaking your arm or breaking a bone. Usually the bone heals stronger in the broken place. This is your opportunity to do that. So don't fall in the pitfall of not giving your divorce its fair due and clinging to your rightness so that you end up having a relationship with your ex that is never truly healed. So That's what I've got for you today. If you do have questions, you want to take this further, I'm going to pop my scheduling link in the chat box. You can hop on my schedule, have a complimentary consult, and we'll talk about what you've got going on. And then if you are listening to this later or can't see the link because it's audio only, then please go to my website for my book, and you can get the ebook downloaded for free. That's unhitchedbook.com. That's unhitchedbook.com. And I invite you to reach out to me through that website if you have additional questions or want to take this further. So join me next week for our 15th and final webinar in the Unhitched Webinar Short Series. We will be talking about finding love after divorce. And I've got some tips for you on how to do that. Take care, everyone. See you next time. Bye.